I'll try not to use my lecture voice too much with the microphone, so if I'm blasting you out, you'll just have to let me know. Welcome to our workshop on building an institutional framework for faculty success. I'm Diane Rover. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Iowa State University, and I'm the PI of the grant that is behind this workshop. And just to do the obligatory acknowledgement and disclaimer for NSF, we do appreciate their support, but the views that we reflect here are ours and not necessarily those of NSF. This workshop has been motivated through several initiatives. One is Iowa State's participation in NABI, the National Alliance for Broader Impacts. If you don't know what that is, you will learn about that in our first session. And Iowa State has a program called SP at ISU, Strengthening the Professoriate, which focuses on broader impacts, and thus our participation in NABI. It's also driven through ISU Advance, as well as NSF's Career Life Balance initiative. This workshop is led by a terrific team that I've really had a pleasure of working with, and they're listed on the inside cover of your program book, and you'll meet many of them throughout the day, so I won't introduce them now. With their efforts, we have tried to bring together several communities that may not always work together, and we want to expand our view of faculty success and retention, and you'll see as we go along, hopefully, that we're giving an opportunity to learn, share, and work to that end. And we are so pleased to have all of you here today and tomorrow. I'd like to begin by introducing the Associate Provost at Iowa State University, who will more formally begin the morning with opening remarks. And that is Dawn Bratsch-Prince, again, Associate Provost for Faculty at Iowa State. She's also a professor of Spanish. She provides leadership in recruiting, advancing, and retaining faculty through institutional policies and programs that support faculty development and success. Among various duties, she oversees our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching and also ISU Advance. She serves on the Iowa Network for Women in Higher Education and on the Big 12 Chief Diversity Officer Consortium. Dawn, please join me.
Great. Well, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this morning, and I'd like to thank you for really your commitment to faculty success, which is why we're all here today. I'd especially like to give thanks to Diane and her planning team and the National Alliance for Broader Impacts for making this workshop possible. So in my role as Iowa State, you've heard I'm Associate Provost for Faculty, so I do all things related to faculty, and I see firsthand the impact when our top faculty are recruited away elsewhere, or when our new faculty leave before the promotion and tenure decision, or when that promotion and tenure review is unsuccessful. And of special concern to us is the retention of our diverse faculty, particularly our faculty of color and underrepresented faculty in our many STEM disciplines. These are areas where nationally faculty are in very high demand, and we don't want to see our efforts undermined when we bring good people to campus, attract good faculty. We really have a commitment to helping them be successful and staying at Iowa State, at our institution. Faculty retention is a very significant point of emphasis for programs like Advance and for institutional diversity efforts. And I know all of our campuses are working hard on this recruitment and retention of an excellent and diverse faculty, not only in STEM, but throughout the disciplines. So retaining excellent faculty is in the best interest of the institution, in the best interest of our departments, and of course in the best interest of our students. losing faculty has a financial impact on our institutions, and we've all experienced that, but it's also a cost. It's expensive in terms of faculty time. I don't know any faculty member who is eager to serve on more search committees. It's a huge investment of faculty time, faculty effort. So retention is critically important. Retention issues also contribute in very subtle ways to morale in a unit, in a department, at an institution. I always tell our junior faculty when I do new faculty orientation, we hire you because we have faith that you can be a full professor. A previous provost used to say that. We only hire full professors. We hire people that we know can be successful, and it's our responsibility to help them in every way possible to be successful. So if we step back and look at the reasons why faculty choose to leave our institutions, it's rarely about money, and I deal with faculty retention issues, and this is something that I've observed firsthand. It's rarely about money. It's about departmental climate. It's about the community. It's about the ability to balance or integrate work and life demands. It's about family-friendly policies for all of our faculty, and also addressing the needs of dual career couples. And that's something that we've seen grown in the past 5 years to a really significant proportion. So all of these issues really determine whether we're successful in keeping our excellent faculty at the institution. And I say keeping and retaining, I mean not keeping people, of course, against their will, but having them want to be at the institution and having them be successful. I think that's the better way to frame it. So these are the issues that we're going to talk about today, that the workshop is designed to address, and this is why your participation, our participation, is so very important. So let me just thank you again for being here today. I know October is a very busy month for all of us in our academic institutions. It's not just midterm time, it's just crunch time for most of us. So we really appreciate your participation, and I look forward to hearing our speakers and to taking back to my own institution some new best practices. Thanks.
So let me also just extend a bit of thanks before we get going, and again to my team. You'll meet them throughout the day, especially Megan Heitman, who most of you received multiple emails from. There's Megan right there. She's the program manager for SP at ISU and also is on this project and has done a Herculean job with a lot of planning. So please thank Megan. Again, I'd like to thank NSF and especially the Career Life Balance Initiative and Bernice Anderson, who are supporting this project. You'll hear more about NABI, and NABI has certainly supported us in various ways, and one of the NABI members is Northwestern University, and Northwestern, we're on the campus of Northwestern, and they assisted with local arrangements, so we appreciate that. And then we've also taken advantage of Iowa State University's conference planning and management, and Jennifer Vitt is around, and she's up here and has been helping with overall arrangements. So thanks for everybody to help make this workshop happen. A few logistics as we, before we get started with our morning sessions. You do have the schedule in your program book, and as you look through it, you'll see the sessions and the breaks, etc. The times are there, the locations are not, but it's all very convenient. Most of the meetings are right here in this room. We have our sessions here this morning and this afternoon. Breaks are in the back of the room. Lunch will be served, and we'll use the tables in the back for lunch. So some of you that might still be lingering back there, at some point you may want to move forward this morning or during break for the second session in the morning in case they need to do some setup for lunch, or at least it will be a little less noisy if you're closer here than in the back. So you can look through that schedule and see a number of sessions. The session 4 later this afternoon, mid to late afternoon, is the last one where we'll be sitting and learning, and then session 5 will start to get more active with some with a World Cafe format, and that World Cafe format will be at the tables in the back of this room, and so we'll mix you up a little bit. And then after that session, we have a reception, which is just out in the foyer here on the second floor. So again, it's very convenient locations for today's activities. And then tomorrow we'll convene back in here in the morning. We will have some breakout sessions, and our breakout sessions tomorrow use some of the rooms, smaller rooms right across the hall. So, we'll guide you on that as we go through those sessions, but you're in the right place if you're here. You'll be able to ask and get to the right place. You also have various information in your registration folder, and one of them is a little note on the Wi-Fi. And so there is a Wi-Fi available in these meeting rooms here. It's not necessarily the same Wi-Fi login as in your hotel room, so you'll want to note that there is an ID Iowa 1 and a password Hilton 1 to use to get onto the meeting room Wi-Fi network. We provided some hard copy materials in the folder, but there are electronic versions in an ISU box account, and so that link was provided to you in an email. If you don't have it, please ask at the registration desk and they'll provide it to you. There's some materials there, and then as we get the speaker presentations, we'll be putting them there as soon as we get them, and so you'll have access to those. And then in your folder, you also have an informed consent form, and we would like to be able to use the discussions in here as part of our project. And so if you're willing to sign that, some of you already did sign it. If you haven't signed it, are willing to do so, please do. And we'll remind you later today before we get into the interactive sessions. Just a couple other things to note. There are a couple of flip charts up here, and we're going to be, learning, sharing as we go through some of our sessions. If there are topics that are not addressed, but it seems like, well, that might be taking us off on a tangent, but you want us to think about it at some time during the workshop, either in a session, in a breakout. That's the parking lot. And feel free to come up and write down topics that you think maybe deserve a little bit more attention, a little more discussion. Put them in the parking lot and we'll come back to them. And then the focus areas, those are areas where and some of you might have expressed this as you registered and you said what you're interested in. As you go through the sessions, if it's like, oh, I really want to learn more about this as I develop, policies and programs on my own campus. And you're going to have a chance to focus on some of those tomorrow at the very last session. And so those focus areas, you may want to have one of our speakers, another, expert in the room, or some resources available to you to work more one-on-one or small group with later tomorrow morning at that last session. And so if you are identifying an area that you say, yep, I want to consult with someone, please write that area down on that focus areas flip chart, and we will try to then use that to organize that last session.
Well, good morning. My name is Susan Renoe, and I'm the moderator of this session, Understanding and Recognizing Broader Impacts Work at Multiple Levels. And if you look at the slide, I like to fool around with funny things. I was looking at that, and I thought there were some key points to this. So, understanding and recognizing broader impacts work at multiple levels. So one of those things is the idea of broader impacts work, right? And we're going to hear a lot of our faculty talk about that. What is the work of broader impacts? I'm going to talk about that. Julie's going to talk about that. But also understanding and recognizing that broader impacts actually work at multiple levels. So on my campus, I like to think of broader impacts as being more than just what happens in the research office. It affects development, it affects communications, it affects researcher success. And so I want you to be thinking about those two things. Broader impacts work, and broader impacts work. So in this session, which I'm very excited about, we have several speakers. You're going to hear me talk about sort of what is the framework for broader impacts. What is it? Why it's important? What we've been doing on our campus at an institutional level, and then what we've been working on at the national and even a little bit at the international level. I asked Julie Risien from Oregon State to be part of this discussion because she has a really innovative idea about how to foster the broader impacts identity in our researchers. And I think that that is really key. So many of our researchers think about broader impacts as being something that's tied to a particular project, not to something that they want to see over the course of their life. And so Julie's going to talk about that. I want to thank Yarrow Axford and Evan Scott from Northwestern University for being here. We invited them to come because we wanted to get the faculty perspective. I know that on our campus, people believe me when I talk about broader impacts, but they really understand it when the researchers talk about it. So we've invited them as examples of early career faculty who are integrating broader impacts into their research, and they're going to talk about that. And then I'm super pleased to have Heidi Appel and Jack Schultz from our campus here. They are truly an example of what excellent broader impacts is and what the potential, what you can use broader impacts to do not only in your research but into affect change. So the way the format will be is I'll talk, then Julie, then we'll ask them to talk, and then we're going to open it up for questions. This is one of the panels where you can really ask a researcher what they think, how important is this to them, what it is they'd like to see. So I'm going to talk about building a framework for success, and I too had to put my NSF disclaimer up there so I don't get in trouble. So we're going to talk about 4 things. What is broader impacts? Why is it important? What are we doing about it? And what is the future? So a lot of people ask me what broader impacts is, and apparently we're supposed to have some really stellar definition. So far I haven't found a good one that doesn't include the word broader or the word impact. So we'll use NSF's definition, which is, it is the societal benefits of research. I also like to think of it as the return on investment that we as American taxpayers make. So what is it? Just a few examples, because pictures of people doing BI is so much more fun than just a slide with text on it. So up here at the top, any of you from a land-grant institution with a cooperative extension, woohoo! Shout out to that. This is one of our field days at one of our research farms in Missouri. We have a really active partnership with our extension office working to integrate extension and broader impacts. And one of the things that we've tried to get our researchers to think about is our field days bring thousands of people from across the state together to hear about what's going on at the university. And it's a way for our researchers to plug into something that's already happening and to use it. So that's one of our examples. This over here is an example of something called Adventures in Education. It's a program that our campus put on where we would train graduate students to do outreach with our public schools. So here is one of the stations. So the graduate students choose a topic. They work together to plan the booth, and then the students and their parents come. This is one of my kids' favorite because they liked all the bubbles that shot up in the air. One of the great things about that is it provides BI training and experience for graduate students, and a lot of our graduate students are interested in that. This is Tommy White. Tommy runs one of our research cores, the electron microscopy core on our campus. Our campus is very close to a small public school that is focused on the arts, and so we bring a lot of students from Lee Elementary School in. Right now they're looking at images on the electron microscope and looking at how they can turn that into art. Because we have a very sort of arty kind of town with lots of resources available, a lot of our scientists are interested in that, the intersection of art and science. In fact, our Museum of Art and Archaeology has a museum educator who's getting her PhD in art education looking at the intersection between art and science. So there's a lot of our researchers who are interested in that. And then this one is just my favorite. It really is. So one of our researchers on our campus studies human origins in Africa, and for her BI, she said that she was going to make presentations at a local school on the work that they were doing. And when she got there, she found that the local school had been closed for about 20 years. And so for her BI, they actually built a school. And when her grant was over, she started a nonprofit foundation to continue providing funds for that school. How cool is that? I love that. So NSF gives about 9 suggested areas of broader impacts. And usually when I put up this slide, our researchers are writing furiously. When you look at it, it's pretty ambiguous. There's just about anything in the world you could think of that fits under these 9 categories. Of note, I want to mention that before this came out about 2 years ago, there was a list of about 5, and number 5 was broadening participation. It has now moved to the top of that list. And if you look at some of the solicitations from NSF that come out, some of them ask specifically, what are you going to do to broaden participation? And that's in addition to broader impacts. Not all of them, but many of them. And I think that's one of the ways we're going. It's of note that you should see that it says improve STEM education and educator development at any level. That's pre-K through lifelong learning. Anyone that you're interested in talking to and engaging in your science, you can do that. One of the things that has been interesting over the last year is looking at the role of undergraduate education in broader impacts. And people are trying to figure out what's the difference between teaching classes as part of a faculty member's job versus something that's really unique and innovative and affecting change. And people are talking about that. Increase public scientific literacy and public engagement. This is just my favorite. Improve well-being of individuals in society. So if none of these other things fit you, you have to be able to fit in that category, right? And then down here towards the bottom, these last 4 are the ones that I see less of our faculty using for their BI. Most of them have something to do with up here. They're going to broaden participation. There's going to be undergraduate research or training of some kind, K-12 outreach. But this is really important. We are very much interested in developing STEM workforce. So if there's some way that you can use your BI to develop the STEM workforce, they're interested in that. And a lot of times we use that for undergraduate research and training. One of the things that people don't often think about, too, is the partnerships between industry and academia. Our campus has a real focus on entrepreneurship and innovation, and a lot of our researchers don't take advantage of that. So that counts. So if you're in an area where you do a lot with industry, that counts as broader impacts. Improve national security, increase economic competitiveness, and enhance infrastructure for research and education. So I'm an archaeologist by training, and I'm a total history nerd. I have the t-shirt that says I heart history. I'm just going to say it. So I like to give a little background on broader impacts so that people understand what it is and why it's important. So in 2010, Congress passed the America Competes Reauthorization Act. Anybody know why it's important? Megan, you don't count. You should know why it's important. Why is it important, Diane? That's exactly right. So it reauthorized NSF, gave them their budget, and it laid out the broader impacts criteria. It talks about a lot of other things, but it says you will have a broader impacts criterion, and that's in the legislation. A lot of our researchers don't understand that it's actually federally mandated. It also lays out pretty much almost identical to those things I just showed you what we will focus on. So one of the things that I try to get our researchers to understand is that what happens in Washington has a direct impact on what happens in their lab. And a lot of them still don't see that. But the other thing that was really important about this in terms of our framework is that in this legislation there was a little piece of wording that says institutions should be providing support for their researchers to help them figure out broader impacts. Yay, we love that. So that same year, NSF and the National Science Board did a review of the merit criteria. And what they came up with was we're keeping intellectual merit and we're going to keep broader impacts. And inside their report that came out, they said we're keeping broader impacts because we have to keep it. I think a lot of our researchers were secretly hoping that the broader impacts criterion would just, ride off into the sunset. But it's not, and that's because of the congressional legislation. But the other thing in there was that they did a survey of administrators and researchers funded by NSF, and what they found was both groups totally understood intellectual merit. They get what to do with the science. They understand what to do with that in the proposal, but they did not understand broader impacts. And they, too, included something in there about institutions providing support for their researchers around us. So, A year after that, our campus created the Broader Impacts Network. Unbeknownst to me, Iowa State had a grant from NSF to do a very similar work. And when we met, I was very impressed by the fact that even though we didn't know each other, we had the same, very similar ideas for what researchers needed. So why is this important? Why does Congress talk about this? Why does the National Science Board talk about it? Why are institutions like NU and Iowa State and others putting money into a broader impact support infrastructure for their researchers? NSF has a $7 billion budget. They receive about 44,000 proposals a year, and they fund about a quarter of those, about 25%. Now that's high for some directorates, that's low for others, that's the average. What is it that's going to set your researchers' proposals apart in terms of who gets funded and who doesn't? And it used to be that broader impacts was the tiebreaker. If you had two proposals that were equally meritorious in their science, they're going to use the BI to decide. We are hearing from a lot of the panel that are coming back, people are coming back and saying that the broader impacts actually put people into the funding category or knock them out of the funding.
Okay. Morning, everybody. I'm really glad Susan went first because I'm on West Coast time. So as Susan said, I'm Julie Risien. I'm from the Center for Research on Lifelong STEM Learning, which is based at Oregon State University. And also, in my best effort to emulate Susan's success, the faculty lead on the OSU Research Impacts Network. And I'm going to talk a little bit today, not so much about our network, but about some concepts we can use to look at faculty satisfaction in the context of supporting faculty to explore their professional identities with regards to the broader impacts that they want to have over the course of their career. I'll attempt to justify why they need to be supported to expand their landscape of practice, or if that's the communities within which they can make their aspirational identities a reality. I'm using a lens of Wenger's Communities of Practice theory in its most recent iteration of Landscapes of Practice to look at this, and also loosely tying the ideas of social cognitive theory's conception of self-efficacy. So my caveat is I think that when we talk about broader impacts or faculty development, we have this tendency to generalize faculty, and I may very well sound like I'm doing that here, but it's important to me that as I work with faculty, every single faculty member is an individual, they're unique, they have a unique experience that they've brought with them, and even though we can characterize the faculty experience in a certain way, and we can see the flaws with that, I think often we don't recognize all the richness that faculty bring to play. So, in the disciplines that make up STEM, they're really tight communities. There's very well-defined boundaries around these disciplines. There's a rigid sense of what it means to be competent within a discipline. Our graduate education, our faculty mentoring, our hiring and reward system, they all feed these really tight, dense communities with really strong boundaries. And that's sort of at odds with some of the things we ask faculty to actually achieve in their careers, and some of the things that they actually want to achieve in their careers. So asking faculty who live in this context, this tightly knit community with really well-defined competence and what it means to be part of that community to sort of do broader impacts is like asking someone to go base jumping when they've never tried rappelling. And I see a lot of faculty come to me with anxiety about this. I've had several that come to me and they say, okay, what is this broader impacts thing? What am I supposed to do about it? Why do I have to do it? I mean, I want to do it, but my senior faculty in my department tell me, don't get distracted by this. But NSF seems pretty serious that I need to do more than check a box with this. And then it will go on into, and I'm totally freaked out about grants and my 10-year review's coming up, and I don't even know what I'm doing here in the first place. And this experience, anecdotally, I started to see this pattern. The assistant professor ranked faculty were having what I would call an identity crisis. And so I began working on professional development workshops to address the issue. And as I was offering the workshop and began talking to colleagues about it, I started to see much more complexity around the issues of professional identity. They're often very accidentally acquired or prescribed by the community, that tight-knit community people live in. They're not intentionally cultivated, and they're governed by the disciplinary norms. So faculty can suffer, right? They aren't able to bring in and express other parts of their identity that don't fit within that norm unless there's significant precedent that comes before them. So I've also started to then look at identity issues in terms of power, oppression, and efficacy, right? That is your belief in your own ability to work outside that community to achieve your broader goals. So this is just a generic disciplinary community of practice. This is the academic rat race, right? You come in, you sort of go through these different measures to get accepted at different levels in the community. And this is the context that many STEM faculty live in, and the context within which we're asking them to stretch outside of their discipline and achieve these other things in their career. So it requires that faculty move into the boundary, the place of conflict, the place of creativity, the place of innovation, outside their training or their comfort zone. Or very possibly those boundaries are actually a place where they can better express who they really are, who they're becoming, and their individual identity as part of their academic career. It's a place where they can leverage the relationships and their passions and other experiences that they bring to the table. But that latter expression of this is a little bit at odds with our system and the way we train people and the way that we structure our rewards. So early career STEM faculty often report it's just too risky to do that. It's too risky to move to the boundary. I'll be seen as distracted, as not focused, and I might not get my tenure. If I try to address broader impacts in this comprehensive way, it's connected to my identity. This is my friend Margaret. She doesn't care about that. She just does it anyways. That's why I just felt like putting her up there. But these are just a few paths in which a PI could express their broader impacts portfolio, right? Outreach and engagement or public engagement with the science is a very common one. It's probably the dominant one. There's social justice issues, equity and inclusion issues, either in your community, but sometimes just on your campus. And I know there's several here today who work on those issues. Then there's innovation in teaching, right? This is a separate movement, emerging separate from broader impacts, but very nicely connected to broader impacts. The paths, though, to access the skills and partners and evidence base to effectively work in those arenas, they're not clear. We don't acknowledge that faculty aren't living in disciplinary islands, right? Our structures support that, but that's not actually who they are. They're rather in a patchwork, a landscape with a multiplicity of communities with which they identify and the boundaries between them. So we do need to offer them the time and the space to think about their identity, to explore their landscape of practice, to succeed with broader impacts, and fully express who they are and who they're becoming as individuals, professionals, and academics. We need to make these paths more explicit and available, and of course tie them to our infrastructures and our reward systems. So I was really pleased today because often when I am in a position of talking about broader impacts, like Susan and maybe some of you in this room, I'm actually in the position to try to defend the federal agencies for their practices and why they're choosing to make us do this. And so this morning, when I was feeling a little bit nervous, I remembered that's probably not going to happen in this room. So this makes me happy. All right, this is my assistant professor who's freaking out about tenure, right? That comes to my office, and with a small crisis about what do I do about broader impacts on this one grant, that reveals kind of a bigger struggle. And I should say this is a pattern that's certainly a lot more dominant with early career female faculty. So STEM faculty do tend towards these once-off, tack-on broader impacts projects, which Susan described in the beginning. But I'm proposing an alternative, an intentional cultivation of a career-long impact identity. A legacy that starts with first unveiling your impact identity, why faculty came to their STEM discipline in the first place, or why they stay and how they're evolving, what they want to achieve over the course of their career. And the idea is that broader impacts projects slowly chip away and reveal that identity over time. And the longer-term goal requires that faculty build the capacity and construct their own landscape accordingly. So we acknowledge that crossing boundaries is risky. I sort of said that already. I'll probably say it again. And we work to help faculty understand what their current support structures are and what gaps they'll need to fill in order to achieve their long-term broader impacts identity goals. So what might traversing a landscape look like? So this is their tight-knit community here, right? At the top, you're recognized as an expert in your field. You go through all kinds of rites of passage and intellectual feats to get there, and sometimes social feats to get there. And you start to see, okay, I've got to deal with this broader impacts thing. And over here, there's another community, and they deal with public engagement with science. And I'm really interested in social justice, and I see those folks over here, and I happen to be interested in art, and I have a friend who's an artist, and I'm really intrigued by that. I'm worried about equity and inclusion on campuses. I feel like maybe I'm not treated all that equitably or included in the way our campus is structured. And I'm starting to see that learning comes with lots of needs for innovation and creativity and addressing the needs of the students we have today, not the students that we had 40 years ago. But the boundary crossing isn't always so easy, right? So you might find that indeed there is this community that deals with social justice, but you're not necessarily able to express yourself there. And they may even have a distinct distaste for you, who knows? But you also might be able to leverage some personal relationships and find the intersection between engaging the public in science and art, and this could be a boundary space with incredible creativity, potential, and amazing ideas. There might be some arduous, long journey involved to get between where you are and this community that interests you and you feel passionate about, but it might be worth it. There might be a bridge that's already been built for you, right? Many people have come before you. Innovation in the classroom is something that's not new in your discipline. So ultimately, though, what I'm just trying to say is that it's very complicated, and we're not wired, really, and we're not set up to support faculty as they traverse this complex landscape. So while crossing a boundary can be riddled with conflict or bursting with creativity, it also can threaten those who define competence in your discipline. The folks in your triangle that are the ones that said, this is what it means to be part of our community. But those boundaries can also be leveraged as learning assets. And I think it's on us to say these are assets. They're assets for achieving our broader impacts, and they're assets for developing our faculty. So in this workshop, encourage faculty to be strategic, to opt to develop their own long-term goals with respect to broader impacts. What impacts do they want to make over the course of their entire career? Some examples might be long-term impact goals might be engaging the public in scientific processes so they better understand science and how to use it for their daily decisions. It's a pretty general goal. A more specific example might be inclusion and training of women in color in your field, because you believe and you're building an evidence base that that type of diversity will bring a much needed innovation. So by establishing these long-term goals, faculty can then focus on building their own capacity and network of partners to help them get there, and improve their competitiveness by being able to demonstrate an aggregate effect over time and being able to show an economy of scale. So it's this identity question, this last bullet here, that I really invite participants to dig into when I have workshops on my campus and sometimes on other campuses. But for our purposes, I propose that addressing impact identities also will implicitly address the issues of satisfaction by acknowledging that complex and personal landscapes of practice faculty members are inhabiting, increasing expressibility at their institution and sometimes within their discipline, that is who they are and who they're becoming as they learn and engage across their boundaries in their landscapes, and offering an opportunity to enhance self-efficacy in the broader impacts arena, which causes a ton of anxiety in STEM faculty in my experience. I don't know, I see Yaro's nodding over there. And I'm not going to read these to you, but I'm also proposing a research agenda here so we can get a better handle on this. You know, well, maybe I will read some of them, but what are the policy and practical barriers? What are the cultural barriers? What activities actually assist faculty in exploring their identities? How can adjacent domains better include STEM faculty in their communities? What's the nature of the infrastructure that we need to pull this off? And how do we best infuse these ideas into graduate education and faculty mentoring?
I wanted something in K through 12.
Thank you.
And I saw that OSAP had this several amazing programs going on, and I just wanted to incorporate this into my NSF career proposal. So that's the next thing I want to talk about, was actually how OSEP helped with that. First, they have a program that they help with called Kits and Cats, which actually invites students from high school to come in and actually see a research lab, do laboratory tours. So that's one thing I do every year. I'm very happy to do that. There's also a biotechnology day where they invite students to also participate and see what goes on in research. And so I knew I wanted to incorporate that. But from my background growing up in Baltimore, my parents wanted me to go to Hopkins. I was supposed to go to med school and all of this. And when I look back at that, I realized I was always forcing myself to go through the pre-med routes, and I took pre-med and engineering at the same time because I wanted to focus on engineering because I liked engineering, but my parents wanted me to go towards medicine. And in the end, I did research, and I realized, I just really want to do science. I even went through the MCAT and all of that. I just don't want to do that. And so for me, I realized that parents are extremely important influence on students. And I had never seen really a program that involved parents equally as they involved the students. So I went to OSEP and I said, I just have this one crazy idea. I just really want to engage parents at the K through 12 level along with the students at the same time. Because I honestly feel that if students actually have an interest in science and in these areas, that parents might force them towards something that's more, apparent in society through television and things like this, and that's medicine. And they don't really consider engineers as someone who participates in this field of work. And I did further research into this and just found out that most people through K through 12, including parents, think that engineers really are synonymous with, say, a construction worker or someone or an architect only. We're actually engaging in many different things now. And particularly in biomedical engineering, there's many more aspects that we can investigate. So I incorporated that into my NSF by saying, we are missing this key parts of medical research that we can do as biomedical engineers. So I developed models of viruses synthetically to minimize all the variables that are involved with a full virus, to try and figure out how they interact with the body. This is a perfect thing for an engineer to do. I have to design this particle, but I have to have a lot of understanding in medicine and biology to do this. And we are simply missing the people who have that interest. And so the best way to do that is to engage them at K through 12 level before they decide to go to college and actually pick a major. And so if I can somehow approach these people to help and get more people in this area involved in engineering, and at the same time try and engage the parents to try to tell them, hey, engineers do this too. Encourage your children, your students to do this. And then also from my background, I never had a professor who was African American ever. I went to Brown, I went to WashU in St. Louis, and I did my postdoc abroad. I had never seen a professor who was African American. And so if we could somehow introduce students to African Americans and women also in science, then perhaps we could actually encourage them to come into this area and also see engineering as a possibility to approach this. So I approached these simple ideas with OSEP, and they helped me build this into a 3-tiered program. So now we have something called Speakers for Students, where I have enlisted the help of a lot of my colleagues, primarily focusing on underrepresented minorities and women faculty in biomedical engineering. And through conferences, I am able to make a lot of friends, and so I was able to get them to volunteer to come give a talk here at Northwestern and go to, which we're working with, is ETHS, Evanston Township High School here. And so they can give a talk at Northwestern, and then for a second day, they would be able to give a talk to the students at a high school so they can see a representative of a minority or women faculty, and then have a second stage where they could actually have interaction with parents through 2 parent groups. And so I would not know anything about these parent groups or about ETHS and these opportunities without the help of OSEP. And so that's how I was able to incorporate that into my proposal. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions later, but I find this to be a great opportunity, and I really, really like the broader impacts. Many people just don't like that, and I just really find it as a great opportunity. So I'd be happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. So our next speaker is Dr. Heidi Appel. She's a senior research scientist at the Bonn Life Sciences Center and the College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources, and a senior associate director of the Honors College at MU. She's a chemical ecologist who studies how chemistry of plants influences their interactions with insects and has a long history of support from the National Science Foundation.
Is everyone still awake? Do you need coffee? No? We've heard two great presentations by early career scientists on their engagement with broader impacts. And, you know, as a senior scientist, I keep accumulating those senior titles. Remain inspired by what I see you doing. So appreciate that. Yes. I'll try to stand here. Yeah, let's do that. Like Susan, I'm a restless soul, so we'll move around a little bit. So I have been doing outreach with great pleasure before it was even required. My first NSF grant was in 1994, okay? And I tend to think of my outreach activities as a little bit like a plate of sushi because, you know, it's the same base with a similar goal, but I'm adding decorative or, you know, food elements to those with each new project. And my focus for years has been on K-12 and teacher education because I felt very strongly that going after the kids when they're young, as you pointed out, and those that instruct them gives you a much broader impact over time. However, I have to admit, over the years, I started to feel a little concerned about whether I'm actually making enough of an impact. And I began to think harder about other ways to engage with the public about science because I have a very passionate desire for the public to understand how science works so they make better decisions as individuals and also as citizens and voters, and if they reach the legislative bodies, policymakers. So, I realized that what I hadn't yet done was engage directly with the public. Okay? I've published my papers, I've done the broader impacts work, but I hadn't really been in the public's face. I hadn't taken on that challenge. And personally, to someone of my generation, that's a little terrifying. I'm happy to write for the general public, but to be in their face, particularly in video, is not a comfortable format. It's something, I didn't grow up in the age of selfies or, the video age, frankly. So I found that I realized that I really needed some additional training to be able to do that. And I was fortunate in that I was able to do a NSF Becoming the Messenger workshop that was happening on our campus, and took advantage of the second day where they put you in front of a camera. And that experience took me over that scary threshold, as you pointed out, the BAMs, that connection, and allowed me to become a communicator in a much broader sense than I had been. And I published an article a year ago last summer, it was summer before last, in a modest journal, but I knew it was a subject that interested the public. And I'm going to tell you about the media story around this, but not for my own benefit, but for you to see and use as kind of a parable for what you can provide the scientists, even senior ones like me, and the benefits that arise from it. So we were ready, and I worked with our news bureau on a news release, and probably equally importantly, we put together a video that involved these caterpillars crunching on leaves, and also interviews with my collaborator and myself. Okay, so we had media content ready to go, and boy did it hit, and it hit hard. Okay, I knew it'd go a little ways. I was very surprised by how far it went. We've had over 5,000 media placements on this piece and has brought the university a lot of recognition. Okay. Well, not all the recognition was positive. This is Rush Limbaugh saying some wacko scientist claims that certain plants, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And more recently, it was highlighted by Jeff Flake from Arizona's, waste of money science blog. Okay. So not all of it's great. But that kind of media attention got me in the face of my peers. And so even though this was a modest piece, not published in the big major journals, it was a quality piece of work, but it was picked up by Faculty 1000. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had the media play. There's so much science being published out there that it wouldn't have been recognized. I learned a lot from this experience and felt I had a responsibility to share it with other scientists in the hopes that they would also engage. And so I wrote a piece for The Conversation, which if you don't follow that is a terrific blog, and there's a US edition now for the last couple of years. And there are many, many academics writing for this journal, online journal, okay? Well, that was great. We picked up a lot of additional media attention that way, which told me not that the media attention per se was good, but that people were interested in this subject and wanted to understand better how to promote science. This is a current read number for that site, and that was driven in part because then the London School of Economics Impact blog picked it up. And that means there was an even broader group of people that were interested in helping or understanding how to help scientists promote their work to the public in an understandable way. This has helped my career. I mean, I mentioned the F1000, Faculty 1000 citation. It hasn't, I haven't gotten the black marks yet. It still could settle out. I get more invitations to speak. The citation on this particular article has pulled up all of my recognition scores and the various metrics they use. So as a scientist, the time spent being ready and then engaging with the media on this has, provided great rewards to my science as well as my personal desire to engage with the public. I want to emphasize that these two pieces were critical to having that happen. And that means that university news bureaus are a very important step. And as you'll hear in a minute or two from Jack Schultz, who has developed his own media team in the center in which I work, the additional support to provide the video footage was critical to pushing this story as far as it did. So there's a real strong, important role for institutional support in this. So I received from my institution a wider readership for this article and subsequent ones. I had more invitations to speak and a greater appreciation of the benefits to public engagement. Sure, it was personally great fun, but much more importantly, I'm pushing a science story out in the public so that they can understand, what it is and how exciting scientific discovery can be. My institution provided a little science communication training, a news release, and support for media contacts. My institution received back extensive media coverage for this article, and actually, Jack and I published together a second article that rode kind of a second wave on that was pushed from the first, so it helped push subsequent articles. And it inspired me to help develop with a science journalist a new course in finding the story in science, in which we team up science students and journalism students to explore opportunities in science communication. So with a little bit of investment from my institution, they've gotten a lot back. And this is from a stodgy old senior investigator, right? So there's hope for us old ones to kind of cross the boundary into even more active engagement in public communication. And I urge those of you who are in the institutional framework here to pursue and those kinds of opportunities, providing those for your scientists. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to questions later.
This is Jack Schultz. Jack is currently director of the Christopher S. Bond Life Sciences Center at MU, where he leads and develops interdisciplinary research programs with 35 investigators from 12 departments across 6 colleges. His research on how plants detect, identify, and respond to insect attack has been supported continuously by NSF for over 40 years. Please welcome and join Jack Schultz.
Hey, I didn't do anything yet. But she's right about that long tenure at NSF, and in part, like Heidi, it has to do with having identified the broader impacts of the work since 1978, so it has played an important role. I started my career, which is about figuring out why pests don't rule the world and eat all the plants all the time. I started that career with a butterfly net. And then it turns out that birds were part of the story, so we had to expand to ornithology. And then it turned out that, oh, well, I had a cover up, sorry. Then it turned out that chemistry was an important part of the story, so we had to learn chemistry. And then it turns out that viruses were an important part of the story, so we had to learn virology. It turns out that insect physiology, particularly caterpillar guts, got to be a really important part of the story. And so I had to find a collaborator on caterpillar guts who turned out to be somebody you've already seen, all right? So the broader impact there was a family, as it turns out. We had to learn to use radioactive tracers to figure out what the plants were doing. And nowadays, our focus is almost entirely molecular. It's all about genes and networks of genes and mathematics and that sort of thing. So things have really changed, answering the same questions that I was interested in 40 years ago by virtue of collaboration. Despite the Superman t-shirt, there is no way I am a master of most of these subjects. And that's the way modern science is. In fact, now I've got another job in which I've lost my arm, in which my job is to get rid of those boundaries we heard about and get scientists to work together as teams, because modern science is a team sport, okay? Modern scientists are aware of this. Not so much old guys like me, but modern scientists really know this, and so it's not surprising to them to hear that they should interact with a chemist or somebody different like that. We're talking about broader impacts, and there they have to take the same approach, but really go across boundaries to areas that they would never have thought that they would collaborate in, okay? So we see broader impacts and communicating science to the public as just an extension of our normal collaboration into areas that we just don't know that much about, but that's why we collaborate. So the things that journalism does, that Stratcom, Strategic Communications does, are the ways to get stories in front of people. You know, we really want to be on their TV. We don't just want to be at the bottom of the magazine pile somewhere. Our scientists, as you've heard several times here, it's not immediately apparent to them how to get into the third grade classroom. So an education college can help with that. The arts and the humanities are critical. I mean, most of the scientists I know can't do a clever poster like this. Okay, it's too bad. And then, of course, economics rears its ugly head, both in grant getting, of course, but also in the increasing application of modern science to our daily lives. So what we've done in the Bond Life Sciences Center is develop a network of interactions with other units on our campus that do things we can't do. Our theater department has an applied drama center in which they try to answer the question, can we get people to change their behaviors using theater? Now, what we want is people to change their behaviors on the basis of science, and they help us do that. And you can sort of figure out what the other ones do here. So collaboration is the name of the game. Organizations like Susan's are there to make that happen, and we really need that on every campus. Along the way, by putting together these teams, it's allowed us to land some major training grants. The one from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute began a process of teaming journalism students with biology students, which has turned out to be very profitable for us. And we have a grant from the new version of ICER. And this is a grant we're calling Decoding Science, which is a research grant to answer the question, do any of these techniques that we use to train people to talk about science actually work? There are way more workshops than there is evidence that any of that stuff works. So NSF thought that was an interesting thing to pursue. It has allowed us to make inroads into all sorts of areas that we never dreamed of. I probably spent 4 or more hours with Michael Pollan on this article that he published in the New Yorker a couple of years ago. I never thought I'd see our center or us in the New Yorker. They reject all my manuscripts. Heidi already told you her story. What she didn't mention to you is that that story turned out to be the largest news story that the University of Missouri has ever had on any subject. Okay, so, and boy, were we surprised. Connecting with the Education College on our campus allows us to sponsor, support, collaborate on lots of events for school kids. This one, the Science Sleuth one, which is a favorite of one of the people in the Education College, 2 years ago, was set up for a couple of hundred students and 3,000 showed up. So success is a little dangerous too, you know, when that happens. And then teaming up with artists, and you've heard some suggestions that that's a good idea. We agree, that's a great idea. Each of these student-produced pieces of art here represents a research project in our Life Sciences Center. It drew audiences and turned into a summer camp in which students explicitly tried to express the science concepts they learned in art forms. The kid in the upper right there is recording music from a plant. You have to ask Heidi about that. And then this kind of project has turned out to be an important broader impacts program.
My name is Danny Anton, and I'm a Mizzou grad. And last semester, I spent the time here working in the Life Sciences Center with Dr. Mendoza's lab. And we went to find out if embedding journalists in the lab would help us better communicate scientific results to the public. Seeing the scientific process, it really taught us how easy it could be to misreport information or misinterpret it or misunderstand. By understanding that disconnect, we need to make that gap of relaying information that's technical on the technical side, but also making sure that the average layperson will be able to understand that information as well.
It's not that they don't understand science, it's that when you actually do things, you have a better understanding of what's going on. As a journalist, I can only assume that you can do research about it, but doing it takes you to a different level. So maybe that's going to help with the communication with the public.
This is a broader impacts program for an NSF Career Award. We're carrying it forward this year. We're providing the resources, and the journalism school is providing people to video that program. So there will be videos of the people doing the videos in the labs that we can distribute nationally. And then finally, a collaborator that can't be missed is our local community. And we do what a lot of people do to reach them, and that is a science cafe. It's turned out to be very successful, sold a lot of beer in town. And allowed us to do lots of different things on different subjects, all of which is aimed at carrying our science to the public so that they understand what we're doing, what they're paying for, and having an impact on the way they think about things. So bottom line here is it's all about collaboration, but what needs to be done that's a little tricky is convince the individual scientists that collaborating with these weird people from education and journalism and history and so forth is worth doing, and I think so far the evidence from our point of view is that it is very much worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. So I know that we're the first session, and if we run over, everyone else runs over. But thank you, Diane. Diane gave us like 6 minutes of grace period. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes answering questions. This is a great opportunity to explore further. I do just want to throw a shout out to Kemi Jonah, who's in the back there. We have Kemi from Northwestern. He is from the OSEP office. And as you heard them say, having institutional support for your researchers that is easy and available for them really helps. So we're going to open it up for questions. Megan has the mic. So Julie, why don't you come up too? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Maureen Stanton from UC Davis. Susan, you mentioned in your broader impacts center, mentioned something about graduate student fellows. How engaged, how involved are grad students in your center, and who pays for that?
Okay. So we help graduate students in about two ways. One is that our campus has what I consider to be the foremost expert in the GRFP, and between the graduate division, the Office of Fellowships, the Office of Undergraduate Research, and my office, we all provide support for students who are putting in GRFP applications, which are due in just a few weeks, so we do that. But in terms of my office in particular, we have, for the last 3 years, hired graduate students primarily in science, but right now I have one in engineering, in computer science, who runs our website and our social media, so we help with that. We also have had 2 scientists, PhDs, who are working right now. One is a chemist who wants to get a career in communication and science outreach, so she's working for us. We have a postdoc who is deciding that same thing. And then we also have an undergraduate from the Ag Journalism Department who's our photojournalist and writes for a lot of our publications, and our office pays for them. So that comes directly out of our budget. I think it was something that kind of grew symbiotically in that they wanted more help, and we realized we could use their help. So it's not something that we planned at the beginning, but it's something that's been very successful. What's the question up here?
Thank you. I'm Beth Michneck from University of Arizona. These were 6 really fantastic and engaging talks, so thank you. And I'm wondering the extent to which on your campuses the promotion and tenure guidelines and annual performance review guidelines have been modified to directly incorporate the value of what you're doing rather than having it be icing on the cake.
I can talk a little bit about OC. So at Oregon State, we have these modified P&T guidelines, and they are very generic. So they make space for the possibility that a review panel or a P&T committee would actually take into account broader impacts activities and things publishing in different ways than in what we're used to, but they don't require it. So it really comes down to practice, right? Who's on the committee and what practices are they going to employ as they go forward through the P&T review. So the possibility is there, but the policy isn't strong enough to really mandate it.
May I comment? Yeah, good luck with that. It's going to be very difficult. I think that's a generational turnover phenomenon, and we may have to wait for a generation to turn over to get that done. Some of us are interested in hastening that, perhaps. One thing you can do on this issue, as well as the issue of interdisciplinary collaboration, because investigators can pay for that at tenure time too, is for new hires to try to write expectations into their offer letter so that later on, as that offer letter passes through or is contained in their dossier and they get to advancement points, they can say, and hopefully the departments will say, see, we expected this, don't discount it.
There's a question way in the back. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Feel free.
I can say as a new professor, an assistant professor, I've only been in Northwestern for 2 years, the focus is still very much on how many publications can you have, can you graduate students, and can you fund your lab. Then there's another section where what kind of other activities are you involved in. You have to show you are active in other areas, but they aren't very specific, and it could be many different things, and there's not a focus at the moment on broader impacts.
Just a quick, if you're looking for an example of that, Jerry Dwyer at Texas Tech had an NSF I-Cubed grant that was very education-centric, and they were successful at getting it written in, all of that work written into the P&T document at their university. So it's actually in there, and their faculty that are working in his office are getting recognized for that. So that's an example if you wanted to look into that of a university who's been successful. There's a question back here.
Yeah, from Northwestern University. And thank you to the panel. It was very interesting presentations. My question is about evaluation. There is an expectation by the NSF that the programs will be evaluated, and I was wondering who is providing the evaluation and assessment services for the different programs, and how is it bundled into the development of the programs?
Well, I can tell you how we do it on our campus. The people who work with us, so we do a couple things. We have had a faculty fellow for evaluation. It's not possible for her to be the evaluator on every single NSF grant we put in. So what we've done is we've created two things. One is a list of evaluators on our campus that they can plug into. The other is we worked with an evaluation company to create an evaluation toolkit that's on our website anybody can look at. And one of the things it does is it gives basic information basically on what is evaluation, what do you need to evaluate, what are some evaluation plans you can use for different types of broader impacts. It also has a flow chart to help understand when you need an external evaluator versus an internal evaluator. So those are sort of some of the resources that we provide for our faculty. Most of them, we get them to do the BI part, and then they get kind of deer in headlights when we talk about evaluation, and then they really get sick to their stomach when I tell them that there needs to be evaluation budget included. And so we try to help ease that a little bit with our support.
Evaluating these things is a growth industry. Nobody knows how to do it, and everybody's looking for somebody to do it for them. So any of you who have significant research programs on your campus in evaluation should be looking for grants, because everybody really wants to know what works and what doesn't, and very few can answer that question. So it's a hot research topic.
My name is Kiyomi Jarretts. I'm from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And to address the gentleman's point first, if you have sociologists on your campus and they have some sort of center, we have the Bureau of Sociological Research, and they do fantastic evaluation. And you don't have to know anything, and they will talk it through with you so that you make sure that you're evaluating what you actually want to. And it's really great from a science perspective, because you have very little or no training in that, but they know all of that. But my comment was actually about demonstrating your impact as an assistant professor, and people who do non-traditional things are going to have to explain themselves over and over, and a lot more than people who do very traditional things. And I think it's important that new faculty are told this and that we're very upfront about it, because that's what they're going to encounter. And it can be very irritating to repeat yourself over and over to so many people. But what I found shuts people up the fastest is to explain to them how my research or my activities ties in to the goals of my department, to the goals of my college, to the goals of the college, and to the goals of the state. And most of us have enough state and college initiatives centered around STEM and STEM outreach and education that's fairly easy to do once you realize that that's how you need to explain it to people, and that seems to be much more effective.
Thanks again to the panel and speakers. I am a sociologist, so thank you for the props. Yeah, and we do evaluation. But one of the things that I find often in working across disciplines that we face is how to create, both in the view of the scientists we work with and the view often of grant reviewers, how to create effective qualitative assessments to demonstrate effective work and impacts. Even in the talks that were given here, the predominant representation of success was quantitative. So I'd be interested in any strategies that all of you have used that would integrate more kind of qualitative depth assessments, perhaps rather than quantitative.
So one thing that I'm working with is this value creation framework that comes from Etienne Wegner, who's the Communities of Practice guy. And it's a qualitative approach where metrics are used actually just to justify scaling of value stories, right? And one of the things I like the most about it is it allows for unexpected outcomes and even failure as learning, right, as value. So I really, I'm just kind of experimenting with it myself and trying to use it in formative evaluation. So.
It seems to me that kind of depends on who you're trying to convince. Scientists in general, they want numbers. In fact, we use Heidi's story as an example or as evidence, quantitative evidence, that your professional career will benefit by participating in these activities. When we offer training to scientists, that's the first question they ask. Will I publish more papers in better places? Will I get more grants? And generally speaking, you have to play to people's motivations. Administrators and sociologists probably have a different set of goals that they're looking for, and they may be better served by qualitative assessments.
I think the other thing that we tend to use is, for my boss, he's in economic development. He wants to see the numbers, like Jack said. But it seems like within broader impacts in general, we have a lot of qualitative data. So when we go and do focus groups, that's one thing that we do, using focus groups with the community and talking about science. We have those great sound bites that our kids give when they go to and they're involved in broader impacts activities, right? My daughter loves Lego robotics, and she's talking about, oh, I can code, and I can do this, and how fun this is. The balance in reporting broader impacts is to find the qualitative and the quantitative together. So using the qualitative stories and the beautiful pictures and the fun that you're having in the activities themselves with the hard numbers together. So you're absolutely right. One more.
Okay, one more question real quick.
I'm Amanda Janser from South Dakota State University as well. This is a question for you, Susan. You mentioned something earlier when you said people come into your office and they might have a list of activities for broader impacts, but what your office provides is a framework for those activities. Could you tell us what you mean?
Sure. So if you were to have gone to the I'm sorry, I need to use the mic better. If you go into the NSF website about 3 years ago, one of the things that you could have searched for was basically sort of an example sheet of broader impacts, right? So people used to go, and one of the things that NSF did was they found that people were finding the list that I put up there as prescriptive, and that the list of examples was prescriptive. And what they were saying was everyone thought, how many of those do I have to kick off that list? And so instead of coming up with a holistic programmatic approach to broader impacts that was around a goal, people were just doing as many things as they could. So the idea was more was better, let's check it off all the boxes. So one of the things that happens to our researchers is they come into our office and we use the idea that we're going to go with what you're interested in. We're going to find out sort of like what Evan talked about. This is what I'm passionate about. Let's build something around that. And so one of the first things we do is we ask them, what are you already doing? And a lot of them, we start listing things off, and they're doing between 5 and 10 different kind of broader impacts activities that they probably didn't even recognize were BI, right? And so then what we do is we start to look at them and we see patterns. A lot of them are around K-12 outreach or public engagement or training. So what we do is we look at what they're already doing and we figure out how can we frame them in terms of those 9 things and give them overarching goals. So for instance, if they are doing K-12 teacher development, maybe they're running a K-12 program in the summer, what we'll say is the broader impacts of this project are to improve improve STEM education at, I don't know, the elementary school level, and we're going to do it by these activities. So all of a sudden they have an overarching goal, they have activities that are related to that goal, and then we take the evaluation in there and we use the evaluation to say this is how we know we've achieved that goal.